Our scripture today is just a continuation, really, of the one that we had last week on the dishonest steward. We're now going to be picking up verses 10 and going to verse 15 in Luke's Gospel, the 16th chapter, beginning with verse 10. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees who loved money heard all of this and were sneering at Jesus. And he said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your hearts. What is highly valued among men is detestable in the sight of God." Thus reads the reading of God's holy word today. One day, a certain old rich man, kind of a miserable disposition type of guy, he visited a rabbi who took the rich man by the hand and led him to the window. And he said, "Look out there." And he said, and the rich man looked out into the street. "What do you see?" asked the rabbi. "Well, I see men, I see women, I see children," answered the rich man. Well, again, the rabbi took him by the hand, and this time he led him to a mirror. "Now, what do you see?" He says, "Now I see myself," the rich man replied. And then the rabbi said, "Behold, in the window there is glass, and in the mirror there is glass, but the glass of the mirror is covered with a little silver. And no sooner is the silver added than you cease to see others, but you see only yourself." Money is an important issue. Jesus spoke more about money, possessions, and finances than he did about heaven and hell combined. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, 1 out of every 6 verses relates to money or possessions. Out of 29 parables, 16 of them relate to a person and his or her money. And the reason money is so important is because it is a spiritual issue. Money is both a thermometer and a thermostat. And I believe Jesus spent so much time on money because it relates to our spiritual condition. A thermometer tells us the temperature of the climate we're in. It also gives us the temperature of our responses, showing us what we believe in God and the health and our relationship. And just as we can look at a gauge to see how hot or cold it is, we can look at money and gauge our spiritual condition. Money is not only a thermometer, it's also a thermostat. A thermostat dictates the climate. The way we treat money will determine the ceilings that exist on our spiritual journey. There are some aspects of our spiritual journey that will cause us a standstill, that we get things straightened out in our posture towards possessions and money. We're not going to go any further. And I think you all know we live in the most consumer-oriented culture in the history of the world. We are constantly being bombarded, and our sinful desires line up nicely with what the culture teaches. The telephone rings in the pastor's office. "Hello, is this Pastor John's?" the caller asks. "Yes, it is." "Well, this is the tax department. We wonder if you can help us." Now the pastor feels butterflies in his tummy. Why is the tax department ringing him? Nervously, he replies, "I'll do the best I can." "Do you know a Bruce Parker?" asks the tax agent. "Why, yes," replies the pastor. "He's a member of my congregation." "Did he donate $10,000 to the church building fund?" A smile comes across the pastor's face. "He will." Oh, is he going to get a phone call today? This leads to character. In Luke 16:10-14, our scripture lesson today, it reveals why Jesus spent so much time dealing with money. Money is a spiritual issue, like I said. It's not an issue of quantity. It's an issue of character. You cannot separate the material from the spiritual. And the principle that Jesus said in our scripture lesson was, faithful with little will be faithful with much. Unfaithful with little will be unfaithful with much. In other words, faithful with worldly wealth will be faithful with spiritual wealth. Unfaithful with worldly wealth will be unfaithful with spiritual wealth. An unfaithful steward will receive nothing in return. You cannot serve two masters. And the point is, what we're speaking about is character. When we approach money and possessions from this angle, the angle of character, we can have victory. So let's look at character traits, I call them, that will help us on our spiritual journey. First is contentment. Contentment deals with how much is enough. The Greek speaks about high-mindedness. In other words, look what I've done. Well, there's no way I can be content and be arrogant because God has given everything to me. And a lot of people think they are okay with God because God is blessing them and things are good. This is not necessarily true, because in Romans, in the 2nd chapter, the 4th verse tells us it's the kindness of God that leads us to salvation. Through His kindness, He is drawing people. All the great stuff going on is not a rubber stamp of approval that says everything is okay. The second tactic to learning contentment is to have a proper perspective of security. 1 Timothy says, tell those who are rich not to be proud and not to trust in their money, but their pride and trust should be in the living God. Where is your security? That's a good question. It's amazing how much we look to money for security. Examples, of course, retirement accounts and IRAs and our employment. But rather, our security should be in God. If God is for us, who can be against us? The third tactic to help us learn contentment is an attitude of generosity. Seneca, a Roman statesman, said, "Money has never made anyone rich." And it also can be said, money has never made anyone content. So the first character trait is contentment. The second character trait is patience. And we say, how can patience help me build character? Well, it will help me delay gratification. Patience teaches me the difference between a want and a need. I can't tell you how many times I have gone shopping and I've put stuff in that cart and I'm running around going in there. By the time I get back to the register and I look in there and I say, now, do I want that or do I need that? And you'd be surprised how many things I go back and put on the shelf because I really don't need it. I just want it. While contentment is the solution to more will be enough, patience is the solution to I've got to have it right now. And it's amazing how our culture conditions us to I've got to have it now. That's why there's such a crisis level on credit card debt. Do you realize 70% of credit cards have an average balance of $8,300? Last year, there were 5 billion card applications mailed out. And 81% of college students have an average balance of $4,000. Credit cards are a heavy taskmaster if you're not careful. Do you realize that on a $3,000 balance, at the average interest rate, if you pay the minimum amount of $22, it will take you 32 years to pay it off. Proverbs 22:7, the borrower is the slave to the lender. Now let's understand something. Debt, I don't think is the real issue here. It's a deeper problem. It could be an issue of greed. It could be self-indulgence. It could be fear. It could be low self-esteem. It could be low self-worth, impatience, impulsive buying. It could be many things. The third character trait is self-control. We need self-control. God does not give us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of self-control, 2 Timothy says. We are supposed to be Christ-controlled, allowing God to be in control of our lives. And it's amazing how we get caught up in peer pressure that causes us to go into debt in order to impress the people that are around us. For example, sometimes maybe we lectured our children that they don't need the brand name clothes. But what about our new furniture and the new dining ware, the new vehicle, all these things for us to look good and keep up with the Joneses? This was the Pharisees' problem. The text today tells us that the Pharisees loved money. And when you love money, your world revolves around it, rather than your world revolving around Christ. It revolves around things. It's about what money can buy you. what it can do for you, and the power or fame it can provide. So if you're not careful, your heart will become enslaved to money. It's like the fly that lands on flypaper and says, "My flypaper," you know. I came up with a list. This is just a quick list of some danger signs that may show that your heart is becoming enslaved. These are just quick. 1, you think more about things than you think about God. 2, you find your time being filled with the worries and cares of this life. 3, you're not giving tithes and offerings as the Word instructs. 4, your actions show you give up spiritual things and replace them with worldly things. And 5, you desire for the things of God is lukewarm at best. These are just a few of the many signs that indicate your heart is beginning to be taken captive. And we need to understand we are stewards and not owners. A steward has responsibilities where an owner has rights. And Jesus teaches we are placed as stewards and not owners. Because when we begin to think things belong to us, greed can easily set in. And the truth is, everything we think we own is God's. And He has just entrusted us to take care of it. So what Jesus instructs us is that whoever is faithful in little will be faithful with much. And the truth of that is, you can't ride the fence. You cannot serve both God and money. So, okay, let's look. The character traits so far that we've discussed. Contentment. Contentment helps with how much is enough. Patience. Patience pays gratification. Self-control helps us to see the truth between a steward and an owner. And the fourth character trait is generosity. The text tells us you will serve God or money. And if you serve money, you don't want to give it away because it controls you. Do you remember, and it's taken me a while to understand the story in a way. Do you remember the story about Zacchaeus, the little man who wanted to see Jesus? We remember that. He was the tax collector. Remember, he climbed that tree in order to see Jesus. And to his surprise, Jesus came to the foot of the tree and informed him that he was going to go to his house. And you remember what Zacchaeus said. I bet you do. Zacchaeus stands and says, "Lord, I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I cheated anyone, I'll give back 4 times the amount." Okay. Then Jesus makes a strange comment. At least I thought it was strange at first. Jesus said, "Today, salvation has come to this house." Now, please hear me, because this is very important. You can't buy your way into heaven. But Jesus knew how important money and possessions are, and when someone is able to give 1/2 of all he owns and is willing to make things right with anyone he has cheated, there has been a transformation of heart in that person. You see, Zacchaeus moved from an owner to a steward. Do you see the difference? And salvation had come his way. That took me a while to get that. And I think to sum all of this up, I found a story. that I think sums this up so well. Once upon a time, there was a rotund little man with dark, brooding eyes who was obsessed with collecting clocks. The world is filled with an almost limitless number of clocks. Grandfather clocks, grandmother clocks, cuckoo clocks, alarm clocks, digital clocks, big clocks, little clocks, medium-sized clocks. And our little clock collector was obsessed with collecting as many as possible. By day, he thought about clocks. By night, he dreamed about clocks. He visited antique dealers to buy old clocks. He perused the shelves of department stores to buy the latest clocks. He went to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of yard and garage sales for all of the unwanted clocks. Soon, he had so many clocks, he had to build a warehouse to hold them. He was, however, haunted by each visit to his clock warehouse. It was as though each time he opened and shut those doors, someone was whispering in his ear. Hans of Sweden has more clocks than you. Jillian of London has rarer clocks than you. If only you could get another clock, then you'd be happy. Well, one day, the little clock collector came to his warehouse with his latest prize. He was pleasantly surprised not to hear the whispering inside his head. But his pleasant demeanor ended the moment he opened the warehouse door. There was someone else in the warehouse, right in front of him, a tall, wiry fellow. And in his hands, he held the most exquisite, antique cuckoo clock. I mean, it was one that our little clock collector had never seen before. "Who are you?" demanded the clock collector. "Why, I'm a thief," said the tall, wiry fellow. And with that, he carried the exquisite antique clock to a shelf, placed it gently down, gave it a quick dusting. He said, "Oh, don't worry, it's not stolen. It's mine, and it's my gift to you." And as the tall, wiry fellow spoke, the voice sounded familiar to the little clock collector. Yes, that's it. That's the voice of the whisperer. This was the voice that whispered in his ear every time he unlocked the warehouse. "A thief, a thief," cried the clock collector. "But a thief would be removing clocks from my collection, not adding to them." "What sort of thief are you?" He said, "Oh, I haven't come to steal your clocks," replied the tall, wiry fellow. "You know my voice, don't you? You've heard me many times." And at this, the tall, wiry fellow leaned in close and whispers, "Hans has more clocks. Jillian has rarer clocks. If only you could get another clock. Is your warehouse secure? Why do the lower income earners get a clock concession?" And he continued, "I've been here every time you visited the warehouse. I haven't come to steal your clocks, my friend. I've come to steal your contentment. Beloved, who or what is the contentment thief for you today?